Thank you, choir, for those reassuring words, the reminder that God takes us as we are, that Jesus loves us, even in our imperfections, that Jesus stops as he did before the tree where Zacchaeus had climbed up, and Jesus connects with us, inviting us to dine with him, to be a part of his work. What a gift, what a promise. Some of you may remember when it was a common occurrence to go to a restaurant and be asked, do you want to be seated in the smoking section or the non-smoking section? Others of you may be appalled that there was ever a time when smoking indoors was such a common occurrence. My guess is the difference between those two groups has something to do with how recently you have been seated at the kids' table. Whether the distinction is between smoking or non-smoking in a restaurant a couple of decades ago, or between the adult table and the kids' table at a family gathering, where we sit for a meal tends to mean something to us and to others around us. If you go into a school cafeteria at lunchtime, which some of you do every day, some of us may do it a bit less frequently, or maybe it has been a while, most of the time, you will see students sitting in the same seats every day, or at least at the same table every day. Sometimes when they're younger, that is because that is their class's table. But if you go in a high school cafeteria, most of the time, you still see students sitting at the same table or the same seats every day, often according to social groups or interest. No one is more aware of these unofficial assigned seats than a new student at the school who is not quite sure where to sit. Sometimes church can be the same. We tend to sit in the same pew every week, and we can get a bit flustered if someone else is sitting in our pew. I'm not calling any names here. If we've been in the same church for a while, we may forget what it feels like to walk down the aisle and look for a seat and wonder, am I sitting in a seat that has been in a certain family for generations? How do we know where to sit? That can be an overwhelming feeling. It can feel a bit like walking through a school cafeteria with a lunch tray amidst a sea of unfamiliar faces. Where we sit means something to us, and often to the people around us. And sometimes we discover that others are not sitting where we think they are supposed to sit, and then we have to decide how to respond. In our gospel text from Luke chapter 19 today, there seems to be some confusion, some disagreement over who should sit at whose table. A well-known tax collector, a man of wealth and means, finds himself, in spite of his resources, unable to see this man, Jesus, who is passing through town and who is the subject of every conversation in Jericho these days. I imagine the conversations Zacchaeus might have overheard. Did you hear he healed the blind? It happened to my uncle's neighbor's second cousin. He was blind, and he told Jesus he wanted to see, and then he could see. Well, I heard he healed on the Sabbath. What kind of God follower does that? Well, he sure does get the Pharisees all riled up. I'd love to be a fly on the wall at those meetings. But you've got to hear his stories. There's one about a lost sheep and another one about a rich man who died, and he suffered eternal torment because he had ignored his neighbors in need. Maybe it was this story that aroused Zacchaeus' curiosity. He is a rich man. He knows he is not well thought of among his people, but he has to make a living somehow, doesn't he? He tries to be a good person, to honor God and give his offerings, but what if it isn't enough? How is he supposed to know if God is pleased with his life, with his decisions? Maybe, Zacchaeus thinks, if he could hear Jesus for himself, he could get some clarity. But being a short man in a large crowd, Zacchaeus finds himself standing on tiptoe, straining to see over the people to see if Jesus has passed by yet. To get a better view, he climbs a tree, peering through the branches at the crowd below. When Jesus does come that way, of course, we know what he does, but he stops and he looks up right at Zacchaeus and says, Zacchaeus, I wanted to talk to you today. Come on down from that tree. Let's go to your house. Remember that feeling of standing in the cafeteria with your lunch tray, not knowing where to sit. Or perhaps walking into a new church, feeling a bit lost, yet also hopeful. How would it feel in that moment for someone to call your name and say, "Oh, I was hoping I would see you today. Come and sit with me." This is the moment we witness for Zacchaeus. The Pharisees are grumbling, of course. Jesus is sitting at the sinner's table. Doesn't he know how that looks? Why would he go to the tax collector's house of all people? Jesus says he too is a son of Abraham. The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Jesus came to offer a place to those who are left out, perhaps who are in between places. Zacchaeus is looked down upon by the authorities for whom he collects the taxes, and he is despised by his own people. He is between these two groups with no group of his own until Jesus pulls up a chair. Jesus sits at what the Pharisees call the sinner's table because he too, the one they call a sinner, Jesus says, is a child of Abraham. He too is a child of God. Perhaps you have felt like you are stuck at the sinner's table. Everyone knows your past, your mistakes, your reputation. Or perhaps you can never imagine willingly sitting at the sinner's table. You want people to think you approve of those people. You can't have that. You can't sit with them. But as Jesus so often does, he steps right past the expectations and he finds a child of God who needs to be reminded that they are a child of God. Friends, wherever you find yourself, stuck at the sinner's table, finding it difficult to go to the sinner's table, without a table at all, at the Pharisees' table, listening to the grumbling, or somewhere in between, wherever you are a child of God. Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, says, "Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done." If you are in need of mercy and forgiveness, or if you are longing for righteousness and justice, may you find Jesus seated at your table. And may Jesus remind you, you are a child of God. And they too, the one who frustrates you, the one who doesn't do what you think they should do, the one who seems so different from you, the one that you just kind of wish would just go to a different table, they too are a child of God. Thanks be to God for a love like that, for a mercy and righteousness that invites us all in, that challenges us to be better, to do better, but that loves us where we are as we are. And so as we come to this communion table, know that there is a place for you here. You are a child of God, and we are invited to receive of these gifts, to eat of the bread and drink of the juice, remembering that Jesus, who came and walked this earth and offered these elements, comes to us just as he did before that tree that Zacchaeus had climbed and says, "You are a child of Abraham too. You are a child of God too." Let us prepare now to receive these gifts of communion.